Assalamualaikum.
Walaikum salam. So I can see a picture of you.
Let's see if the video will work. It let me
Ah,
do
there we go. Awesome. How are you? So just so you know, this is not like a pre-live. We're actually live on Facebook right now. So.
totally fine. No, no, no. It looks good. I'm good. How are
I'm
you?
good. I'm good. Finally, we get to have the discussion we've been going back and forth about having for a minute. So we're going to give Dr. Fuqua just a few minutes to log on. I'm going to see if I can get my Insta people in here. See if I can get my Instagram people in here.
All the peoples, come on. We have things
I
to talk
know.
about.
Here we go. I got my live. All right, peoples. Insta peoples. Are you on Instagram right now?
I am not.
Okay. All right, no problem. We're going to try to do a double live thing, but that's okay. I didn't pre-warn you. We are, so my Insta people have joined me. I hope that you guys can hear me. You guys can have a full experience of the speakers. If you pop over to Facebook on Fit Muslima Mubaraka Ibrahim page, we are getting ready to have a discussion about Black woman savior syndrome and Black women as saviors, right? What does that mean? How do we navigate in these United States of America as Black women and the pressures, and what does that mean in terms of our identity, in terms of the things that we have to choose between and navigate and how we act. And so it's a discussion that we had been planning on having, and there's no better time than now. So you can join us. We have Malikah Karim and Dr. Jean Fuqua joining us today, and you can join the chat too. So if you have a question or a comment along the way, you can put it inside of the chat on Facebook or on Instagram. But Insta people, I'm not sure if you're going to be able to hear my Facebook people, but I'll keep it open just in case you can. Just in case you can. So I'm going to actually move my Insta camera too. All right, let's move the Insta camera. Here we go. Okay, let's actually just go ahead and get started. And I'll actually, excuse me. If you are just joining us, then you are on either Fit Muslima page on Instagram or Fit Muslima Facebook page, and you are going to be a part of a very important discussion about Black women navigating the world inside of the United States of America, which has probably been, I mean, I guess for Americans, we think we've always been center stage, but we've particularly been center stage in the last 4 years, and over the last 2 weeks, even more so. And so we're going to have a conversation from the perspective of being Black women in America, from the perspective also, of course, of being two of the three of us are Muslim women in America. So we're going to have that discussion. And if you would like to join us, then please do. You can. We have Dr. Fuqua is joining us now. So today, and again, I'm just going to remind my Insta people we are live over on Facebook. Hello, Dr. Fuqua. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I was just giving people sort of kind of like intro as to the things that we're going to discuss. And I'm going to actually allow you guys to introduce yourself. So tell people a little bit about what you do, and direct them to, if you have a page you want them to follow or a website. So in this discussion, we have Malikah Karim, who is, let me get this right, if I can remember it, a yoga movement coach? No. Okay. You got it.
Hey everyone, I'm Malikah Karim. I am a yoga instructor. I think that's what she was getting at. But I'm a health and wellness coach. My specialty is in stress management, so I do all things mindfulness and around stress management and life management skills, professional development, and women's health and high performing retreats. I do a lot of women's retreats around high performing women to serve that group. So that's what I think she was thinking of when she thought yoga. But I'm happy to be here tonight.
Awesome. And Dr. Fuqua, if you can introduce yourself and kind of what you do.
Sure. My name is Dr. Jean Fuqua. I am a naturopathic physician and an acupuncturist. And I have a general practice, although I have a strong focus on women's health, a lot on fertility. I would say a lot in terms of mental health, especially anxiety, which I'm sure you guys are seeing just as much. Like 100% of your clients, I'm sure, are dealing with anxiety right now, pretty high anxiety.
So if you don't know who I am, my name is Malikah Ibrahim, and I am a health and happiness coach. And I help, my just mission in general is to make the world a better place by empowering every woman to live a healthier, happier life. So today we are talking specifically to Black women about Black women and what it's like navigating being a Black woman in America. This is a conversation that I had both Malikah and Jean on my radio show a few months ago. And as we were ending the radio show, you know, we could talk forever. We had so much stuff to talk about, right? Because all of our mission aligned and we're like, yeah, and this and this. And so it is a conversation that was long overdue that we wanted to talk about. So I kind of want to, so this was when we decided to have it. It was just such an appropriate time because, as everybody knows, we have a new president and vice president-elect. And our vice president-elect, Kamala Harris, is the first woman of color, first woman and woman of color to hold the office of vice president. And around that conversation is also how Black women delivered this election to President-elect Pence. If it's not around the work that Stacey Abrams did to flip Georgia and make it a pivotal point into the election, to the fact that 98% of Black women actually voted for President-elect Biden. And what does that mean? So I think that we can talk about this on several levels, definitely on a personal level and on a macro level, being in the United States. And what does that mean in today's very contentious time? But let's start on a macro level. Vice President-elect Kamala Harris is a Black woman. She's half Black, she's half Indian, East Asian Indian, but visually, you know, people consider her a Black woman. How does that representation, how do you think that representation is going to impact Black women? And I think people automatically think that it's a positive impact. Is there any negative impact to that? Anybody
That's
can
a good question.
Yes, that's the question. How do you think that's going to impact Black women in America, having her as the vice president?
I hadn't considered any kind of negative from that. Maybe because it's so overwhelmingly positive, in my opinion, to have representation and to see an immediate effect of girls feeling like, yes, I can do that. I can do this. I guess if there was a negative, I don't think that her achieving that has any negative. I guess where negative could come in is in looking more closely at how she or any woman handles the multiple roles that we find ourselves in, and how she's able to carve out space to do self-care.
Malikah, do you have a?
So I guess for me, you know, obviously representation is a massive thing. I think that there's so much information in representation. I think that there's so much unconscious barriers we create for ourselves based on what we see ahead of us and what we see in our environment. So I think for sure the representation piece is irreplaceable. And I think that there are a lot of young girls who are going to have a much more wide open mind than even I had growing up. And, I'm, 33, 34. So, people think that I think the world is at my fingertips, but I think we grew up with still certain barriers about what really was possible, and there was always a settling down of dream big, but let's be realistic. And I think that opened a wider just spectrum of what really is realistic. So that was the first piece. And as far as the negative piece, I don't think that there's anything negative about her earning that position. I do think that it's going to expose some negativity within the community. And I think that's might be some wrestling that needed to happen in order for us to move forward and really heal and do some of that deep work, and just around some people's contention with her even calling herself a Black woman. I think that opened up so much dialogue that we really need to dive into about, what that really means to be a Black woman, what
that was actually kind of like the follow-up, is that question that I had in mind, is that that is a contention. Like, what does it mean to be a Black woman? Is it because she's half Black? Is it because she looked Black? If she was half Black, but she looked more Indian, would the Black community say, oh, this is a Black woman? And I think some of the dialogue that I have seen online is, can she be claimed by the East Asian community at the same time as being claimed by the Black community? And does it just stop at representation? Is she expected? And so this is also a question that we had of President Obama. Is she expected to do extra for Black people because she is Black?
Well, yes. And, I think, and it's not in an unfair sense. So when you first say it, it sounds really like that's unfair, but who else is going to be able to speak to the needs of the Black people more than a Black person can? So I think it was an expectation that you have ingrained and have collected enough experiences of the Black community to then carry it over into the White House, then we will naturally organically see more being done for the Black community in a way that a white person or someone of a different race could just simply not do in an organic fashion.
So, because I think that was also part of the initial criticism when it came to when she was running for president against Biden, is she did not do for the Black community when she was a DA. In fact, that the criticism was that she had implemented laws that increased incarceration of Black people. And again, I think that that's just the flip side of the coin. Are Black people judged more harshly when they're not doing worse to Black people, but they're maintaining the status quo, right? And I think that definitely as Black women, there is a difference in the way that is perceived, even just, navigating the trying not to be the angry Black woman, right? As a Black woman can say something which will be in the same articulation and passion as a white woman, as a white man, or even as a Black man, but yet she comes off as being angry. Where does that come from, and how do we as Black women navigate that, and how do you think that is going to impact her role as vice president? Now, I have to let everybody know that we did not discuss questions, so I'm saying stuff and they're like, that's a good.
You asked so many questions that we actually haven't answered yet.
And so feel free to kind of like this. I really do just want this to be like an open discussion. So feel free to feedback or bring up a different concern or thing that we can dive a little deeper into.
The idea of an angry Black woman definitely played into how she was perceived during this campaign, definitely probably impacted how she debated during her debate. And to just carry it back to some of your other questions about her being Black and biracial, I think that, I don't remember your initial question, but I think that that piece is always one that can become one of contention within the Black community. I've seen it. And what happens is when there are things that we disagree with, so if people are not agreeing with her record as a DA, sometimes it gets placed in the, you're a Black woman and you did this to Black people. Sometimes it gets turned around into, you're not actually one of us. And I understand that piece because I am also biracial. And so I straddle that line of being how I was raised, Black, you are Black. And then as time goes on, I don't even know her age actually, but I can tell you as years have gone on, with each generation, there's like a slight shift in how we, within the Black community, and then how even within the community of those who are multiracial or biracial, define things or are defined by other people. So I think that she will be made to wear all the hats, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, I was one of the people that were originally really turned off and sort of disappointed, I guess would be the right word, around, what I came to find out about her record. But really, when I promised I was going to give her a chance to explain it. I told her, if you're going to win the Black woman vote, you have to explain how and why this happened. And there was one particular interview when she really broke down what had happened. And one thing that we don't do well in our community is listen to each other. We do not give each other the chance that we give other races. And that is something that is deeply disturbing and I think rests more heavily on Black women. I feel like you do one thing that people don't understand or they don't agree with, they throw you in the trash. But they get the chances they give Black men, and let's not even talk about the chances of white women and men that they need or they feel they want to impress, how many chances they get. That is something that I think is just, that I would love to heal. I would love for us to just bust that open during this process of trying to welcome in Kamala and heal that. What Black women need as many chances to evolve as everyone else. And it's just that unrealistic wet nurse perspective that we're supposed to nurse the entire society, like always. So yeah, just the last point I wanted to say with that was just when I listened to her explain it, it really, the high incarceration rate was an unfortunate byproduct of her trying to fix the high rate of murders amongst Black communities. And she connected that to truancy and people not going into school. So she had to put something firm and solid. If you do not put your kids in school, you're going to pay a consequence. And it did incarcerate a lot of people. But if you compare that in her mind, probably between you dying on the street and getting shot or me putting people in jail for not sending their kids to school, I need to make impact, and I feel like that's a perspective and that's a position Black women are often put in.
Do you think that a part of our not giving one another any type of redemption has to do with how women in general, but I feel like Black women in particular we're almost pitted against one another? Like there can't be two phenomenal women in the same space. I know for me personally, over the last few years, I have really recognized that, right? And I've tried to, when I feel myself feeling jealousy or, oh, look at her, or I really do step back and I say, okay, where is this coming from and why? And so often I just remind myself, my own personal exercise is, if everybody was a queen of their queendom, queens pay homage to queens. So I can celebrate you without losing any of my queendom. And so I took that mindset to really try to shift this idea of being pitted, like there's like two Black women in particular can't be successful at the same time. So how have you navigated kind of like that idea, or has that ever been an issue for you personally or in the circles that you are in?
I think every I don't know if every woman, I can say every woman of color has to deal with this because it just is, it's prevalent. And I think that it comes out of at least a couple of things that I can point it to. One is just out of an idea of lack amongst people and feeling like there's only so much of everything. And so if you have that, then that means I have less, or I don't have the ability to get as much. So I think there's the idea of really overcoming lack and really speaking, you know, abundance and life into all of us as a community. And I think that we can still directly relate that back to what was rampantly taught during slavery, to just pit people against people, to have a self-perpetuating slave system. And so I think that we have to battle both of those.
Definitely a battle. I think what I've experienced through clients and through my own personal growth is just when there's a deficit of just self-love, it's really hard for you to shine that love on someone else. It's really hard for you to shine light on someone else when you don't feel lit yourself, when you feel dim, dark. So usually when I see a woman that just gives me or other women really hard time and they struggle for that, I look at that, I take no personal engagement in that. I see that as something that she's struggling with, and it's not you, it's not us, it's something that she's, you know, it's just where she is in her growth, and I hope that she'll come around. But yeah, I think
how do we have that? How do we start that? We have lots of healing to do in our community, but how do we start that in our community of women, of recognizing and healing that, you know, at some point you may be in a competition with another woman, but unnecessarily competing against women? How do we begin to heal that process?
I think a big part of that comes from just doing our own work inward. And I do think that having enough light and love within ourselves for ourselves is a piece. So being committed to loving ourselves and learning if we don't love ourselves and if we don't like ourselves, learning why and how to shift that, I think is important. But I also think it's important that as we see a woman struggling, and that struggle often doesn't look, it's not necessarily pretty, because it can be something that is negatively directed at you. But if we recognize it and we can, rather than being reactive, help that woman to know that we can see her, like truly see her, that starts healing.
And I just think dialogue in general, when we have these conversations, and there are women that are listening to this right now that are going to say inside, I definitely do that, I need to work on that. You know, this is not something that we can't confront everything face to face. I think having dialogues where we're speaking, where we're not asking people to expose themselves, where we can just speak and share messages of the importance of practicing authentic self-care and self-love. And I always ask the question, okay, so do you love yourself? And a lot of women want to say yes because it's very ugly or vulnerable to say no. So they say yes. And then I usually say, okay, so can you show me some receipts? Like, show me some receipts. And it's like a whole exercise practice of identifying how you're proving this love to yourself, almost in a way that you would do with a person outside of you. How you would expect a man that you're mating or going to marry to know things about what you like, what you don't like, what's important to you, all of these different things to really prove their love to you. And I think we need to start taking those approaches with ourselves and letting people do this in their safe spaces, you know?
Mm-hmm. You know, one of the so I read the book by Gabrielle Union, which is an excellent book, by the way. I am not a big, I'm going to be honest, I am not a big like novel, modern day like book read, but I was like, oh, I think I was on a trip and I was like, Audible, okay, she wrote a book called This is going to require more wine or something like that. So that was my trip listen. And it is an excellent book. And I don't normally say that about non-scientific books. But in one of the chapters, she talked about how she went to this party and happened to be with her trainer, who was also her life coach. And she was like, and as she's standing at the party, she's like, another woman walked in. And she was like, and she just kind of like started talking to her trainer. Oh my God, her shoes are this and her dress is ugly and she's this and that. And she was saying all of these negative things about the woman. She's like, and so her coach just stood there and listened to her. And then when she was done, she said, then she just looked at her and she's like, okay, now that you've bashed her, are you richer? Did you get another job? Did that make you prettier? Like, what did it benefit you to talk about her in that way? Right. And that was like, I think that's also when we are with people who we can have a friend, a family member can have that conversation with, then I think that's also really important, is that we actually have like those conversations and discussion with our loved ones, right? So that we can facilitate that growth and among our friends, among our family, and that's what makes our community. As Black women in particular, I think that so this takes us probably to what was the impetus of this entire conversation, which is that takes us to, so we have that conversation with somebody or someone has it with us. How do we allow ourselves to be vulnerable when we have this idea, this myth that Black women have to be strong all of the time, right? Have to be strong all of the time. How did we get there? And do you feel like it's something that's just perpetual, or do you see any change? So where does this myth come from of the strong Black woman? We don't break, we are survivors, we don't cry, we don't like, where does that come from?
A white man. Came from a white man that brought us over on a ship, and that's where it came from. And I think it was perpetuated in the home as that era of slavery went through. You know, we don't experience pain the same. Like, they really believe this. I think it's the point where it wasn't even ugly anymore. They really thought that this was real. Like, we mentally have more capability to manage and hold pain physically and mentally.
And so how did we start thinking that? I guess that's the question. Because, you know, I think, so again, a part of my own kind of journey when I had children, and when you have children, you start reflecting on how you was raised as a child. And I recognized really early, while my first child was probably a toddler, that I had never in my entire life seen my mother cry. Like, and I reflected on that, and I'm like, I think that my entire childhood, I did not actually realize my mother had feelings. Like, literally, like, she did not cry. She got mad at you for doing stuff, but you did not upset her enough that, you know, oh, did I really hurt my mom's feelings? The emotion was either she's happy with you or she's mad with you. There wasn't no, I made my mom sad, or this is disappointing her, or like either she's happy or she's mad. I didn't even think like, oh my gosh, she's a human being. She has feelings. And when I realized that, I immediately was like, I do not want my kids to think that of me. You know, I went through the conversations of crying and apologizing to her on the phone. But after that, I'm like, how do I break this pattern so that my kids know that, oh, I have feelings? And I remember one particular instance when my oldest son was probably about 3 years old. He was like 2 or 3. And I fed him and I gave him his food and he ate and he was running around. And then I sat down to eat. And then he came to me and he was like, can I have that? And I was like, no, you cannot have that because you ate and I didn't. And my mother was sitting there. She was like, oh, just give that baby the food. You could go make yourself something else. And I was like, no. He needs to understand that I'm a human being and I have to eat. And every time I was around her, it was like this battle of I really fought hard to break the mentality of you have to sacrifice everything for everybody else because she was a giver. Right? So how do we recognize that and start changing that generational trauma is what it is and start changing that?
That's amazing that you changed it.
Lots of effort and still trying.
It is amazing. It's amazing. So there's 2 pieces. I think the first piece is you had to do some self-study to be able to look at your mom and see that that was a relevant thing to look at, you know, to see that that was important. So that's the first piece. I think some of us don't even understand where it's coming from or have turned in enough inward to even understand why it's important to look at the relationships we have with our parental units. But then also I think we need to really look at realistically, like emotional expression is a privilege. Like that's something that we're just kind of just evolving as Black people to be able to explore and have the mental capacity where we can worry about other parts of our being or our life other than just survival. So this is kind of, I feel like we're on a normal, natural trajectory down this path of like, you know, the hierarchy of needs. You know, we're now start digging into some of those deeper nuances of, you know, what has been stunted emotionally because we were functioning on survival. Survival has fight or flight. There is no, how do I feel about me running away? You know? You're either running.
You got a point. That is very true. Got a point.
It is. And we see that expressed in how our parents survived. And I think they weren't ready to admit that they were suffering. They weren't ready to admit that they were maybe with partners that brought a lot of baggage into relationships that made our moms the way that they were. Like they weren't, because they stayed with them. They weren't ready to say these things or act on these things. And in these generations, I think is when we'll be able to tackle it.
That's very similar to, we have a comment over on Instagram. Dean Life Mavita said some factuals because of the survivors' incredible resilience. Also because of racism, teaching our children to be strong in the face of racist and terrible conditions. So very similar to what you were saying, that it's a survival. The idea of we have to be strong is about you have to survive. That has now has been reinterpreted as we have to be strong. So where do we go from here? How do we? And so here is, and this is my own personal like thing that I'm trying to navigate in my head right now. Where do we go from here, and when have we gone too far? Because if I hear somebody use the word trauma one more time because they're mad at their parents, like it's a catchphrase for everything. I'm mad. I have trauma. I'm upset at somebody. I have trauma. You're trauma and toxic. I think that this young, and I'm going to put it on the young people. These millennials have overused that word. And I be listening to people and I be thinking to myself, I wish you would not use that word because there are people who actually have trauma. What you are describing is called life. So when do we go too far, right? In this effort of trying to say, it's okay. So it seems to me that there's a pendulum, but when have we swung it too far? Or is there a swinging the pendulum?
I don't think it has swung too far. I think that that's, maybe that's a misrepresentation of those words that are used, but I think that we can say that virtually everyone actually does have trauma. And that's not the same as being mad at your parents, of course. So that just needs to be like, let me just explain to you, that's not trauma. These other things are trauma, but we all do have trauma, and we're not necessarily safe to just try and explore this, just out and about and on the street and in public. So the place that we start to do this, I think, is in the safety of our like the loving groups that we set up. So I know, Mubaraka, that you have done some of this in your retreats. I know that you've touched on these places and you've created safe places for women to explore, for us to explore ourselves and to look at the things that we need to understand differently. And I think that's the place that we do it. And eventually we should be able to shift so that we are safer to do that in a more public way.
Mm-hmm.
That's really true. That safe space is paramount. But more to talk about your pendulum and going too far, I would love to just put in this concept. I agree with Jean that we have not swung too far. I do think that it's going to be an uncomfortable process for us all to face the levels of trauma that we do bring to our children, that we have brought. And because we're looking at comparison, we're comparing, and that's why we're saying, are you kidding me? Because we're comparing to what we experience or what our parents experience instead of looking at it through their current lens. So that makes it a struggle, and it's really hard to listen without comparing. But if you make the intention, okay, I need to turn my comparing mind off, like before you listen to this person who's overusing these words, it may give you a little more information as you listen. But the other piece of it is one issue that is a real problem with the millennials is that they call everything toxic and trauma, and they think that's a stopping place, or that is the reason for why things can't happen, life can't move on, or you can't progress. And that's what I think is missing, because acknowledging trauma is only giving you information on how best to move forward. And that is the missing link, I think, with millennials. Like, okay, that was trauma. We can acknowledge it. It may help them say, and then what's next? Okay, that was traumatic for you. How are we going to process through this trauma to get you where you need to go?
I think that is so true, because in my mind, when I can think of the few situations where that comes to mind immediately about it being overused or inappropriately used, it was used in a way as to make an excuse. Well, I act like this because, or I'm doing this because, right? As if it is a reason for them to act inappropriate, or a reason for them not to do what they're supposed to do. And it is used in that way. So that is a really good point.
Yeah, and it can be a reason, but it's not a stop. It's like, okay, we understand why.
Right.
Let's talk about the habit.
Right. Now, so for Black women in particular, what is different in the way that we need to explore this, as opposed to other women, Hispanic women, white women, other demographics? What's the difference between the work that we have to do? Because I'm sure that on some level, many of the populations there's women who are not Black who are listening to this saying, oh, well, that sounds like my community. That sounds like my mom. That sounds like, right? But is there a difference? Do Black women have to navigate this process differently than other people? And how?
Well, on some level, yes, it's different. And yes, there's similarities. So, I would say that women have similarities. kind of across many different lines. But Black women are facing anything that we're facing differently because it's just how the position that we are still in this society. So there is always the lens that the world seems to be viewing through, that is the angry Black woman, right? And so when do you actually get to, one, be angry because anger is valid, and when do you get to express emotion outwardly without it being categorized as anger? So I think that, yes, it's a little bit different. Where do we change that? I think we always start with changing with ourselves, with each other.
Malikah, what do you think?
I think we've had to do an expedited version of the growth that other communities and other cultures have had, centuries of developing their cultures that have in some ways and have many ways, supported their women. We know in a lot of cultures, the oppression of women is prevalent, but there's also another element of culture that in some way lifts them up or in some way provides them rights. And that's something Black women are really working from scratch in a way that I don't think any other groups are really, that's really comparable in any other groups. I mean, we're working from a level of scratch and a level of having our men be conditioned against us in many ways or intimidated by us in many ways, or just too broken to really add a tremendous amount of value. So we've had to grow through all of these stages. So, to say whether or not it's different, I think it's the same work. It's just we need to do it in the expedited version, time slot in order to catch up with the rest of the world.
I think for me, when I think about kind of like just the experience of being Black, and let me clarify, and you can agree or disagree with my definition, and we probably should have said this earlier. When I say a Black person, I particularly can use that word in terms of any person of African descent or even partial African descent. But when I specifically talk about African Americans, I am talking about people whose ancestors were brought here and enslaved. And I think that is two very different experiences. I think that what categorizes somebody as being Black, because Black is not a race, it's a social construct. But what categorized to me as somebody, and we probably should have talked about this around Kamala, is that how they are perceived by society and how that dictates their experience in this world, right? So someone who is, if we think about back in a time of, when slavery just ended, somebody could have been Black, but they were white passing. And that gave them permission to actually create a persona of a white person. And so their experience in the world was very different than someone else who was also Black, but they also may have been biracial for whatever reason, but they came out looking like a Black person, right? The world is going to be very different for them. Society is going to treat them different. Race is a social construct in that way. And so how you are allowed to navigate in the world determines your Blackness. And I used to say this often when people talk, well, Obama's half white, but nobody treats him like he's a white man. They treat him like a Black man. That makes him a Black man, right? Nobody's treating Kamala as if she's Indian. They're treating her like a Black woman. That makes her a Black woman because being Black is a social construct. So I think that's a really important part of the conversation, because how Black women in America navigate is also going to be different than how African American Black women navigate. right? So if you are Latina and you're Afro-Latina, you have a generational connect that goes beyond even the United States. When you are African American, you don't have that generational connect. You have a different construct around family because your family was disrupted and interrupted and broken up. And we still feel the effects of that today. You know, literally 3 weeks ago, my husband got results from AfricanAncestry.com, never knowing where his lineage was. Whereas someone who is technically called an African American because their parents are from Ghana and they were born in the United States, they don't have to go to AfricanAncestry.com and pay $4.99 to get somebody to do their DNA. Right? It's a completely different experience. I read a tweet, somebody tweeted, said, only in America would Black people be stolen from their home, ripped of their culture, and then made to pay to find out what it was. And that is like the position that we're in. And it creates, I think, a different, not just a different experience for us, but also a different psyche, right? When somebody says, go home, we're like, and where would that be? Mm-hmm. Maybe you should ask your grandparents where they took us from, right? As opposed to if somebody is telling Afro-Cuban to go home, they know where home is, or someone who's Ghanaian American, they know where home is. And so it creates a different dynamic. So specifically for like African American women, I think that it has been the idea of being a strong Black woman is not only rooted in just like the survival of fight and flight, but it's also rooted in how men were stripped for the home and we didn't have time. Even today, when there is more freedom than it was, you know, right after slavery ended or during the civil rights time, we still are in positions where we have broken families in a way that we're still in survival mode, right? Women are working 2 and 3 jobs to come home, to take care of kids, and to think about how I'm navigating, this space is a luxury, it's a privilege. How do we do that specifically as African American women, and how that changes our experience? I think that it changes our experience in a way where we have more to contend with. We need to do it accelerated because we have more to contend with, right? So, for example, when we think about women who we try to align with for women's rights, our experience is much more deeper than the Hispanic woman, than the white woman, than the different types of nationalities, because Black people are the only people who literally we had to prove that we were human in the United States, right? White women did not have, they went from no rights as a human being to right to vote as a human being. We had to prove we were human beings first before we were even considered to get rights. Mm-hmm. So it's a different type of experience. So that's my spiel. What's your spiel on how it's different for us? Any feedback?
Well, I think you're right. I think that is at the crux of why it is different. It's a different experience. Mm-hmm. And there is a lot to contend with. Mm-hmm. There are things to contend with that are, some pieces of our history or our upbringing that play into it. And there is also the piece to contend with that, we don't feel safe in the country yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot that's been written about the psychology of a man with no land. And I feel like women feel that to the second power, because it's like, we are people with no land, and then sometimes we don't feel that home within our own families because of the circumstances that society has created around our Blackness, where we don't really feel secure in our home with our spouses, with our mates. We don't feel secure in our home with our fathers and with our parents because maybe they didn't create the safest environment because of all of these different trickle down effects. So I think women feel that to an nth degree. It's like even when you try to break out into the workplace to decide, okay, I need to support my family and my children. It's you have no home there. There is no growth factor that's going to hold you down. Women actually face a lot more of that inward fighting and competition, much more than men do. Even Black men when they go into the workplace, it's like once you get into the workplace as a Black man, you're usually embraced, and they would usually choose the Black man over a Black woman who's trying to climb a ladder. So it's still, it's like so many layers of man with no land when it comes to the experience of a woman trying to heal. But I think it's just comes down to the fact of the same thing we talked about with the millennials. Like, yeah, you might have a dictionary of trauma and reasons, but let's talk about what we can do to work on it. Like, you can't make them go away, you know? So, that's what I would love for us to share with the audience, is just any tidbits we can about cultivating just the habits around how we break past, how we continue to evolve.
That's a good one. So we'll pose that to you, Jean. How do we break down those habits and evolve to a point where, so on our particular topic, where we don't feel the burden of having to be the savior, right? How do we, and are we even in a position where we are in our evolution to release ourselves of that burden? So one of the things I know during the last few months, there's been even more of an uptick, especially since the death of George Floyd, of, people want to talk about race and what it's like being Black and racial sensitivity and things like that. And I recognize, like, that's not, I don't talk well with non-Black people about that. I'm going to be honest, because it totally frustrates me. So I'm like, let's talk about Black health. Your racism. But, and so Angela Ray, I follow her on Instagram, and I was so relieved that I was not the only person who thought this. And she did give me permission to say it out loud. Like, it's not my job to teach you how not to be racist. Absolutely. That is not my job as I just felt, and I felt this for so long, and it was really hard for me to articulate it. And I think I started to feel it literally when Trump was elected and there was a women's march. I had several white liberal friends that were trying to convince me to go to the women's march. And I had tea with them, and I told them, this is your fight. White women voted him in. This is not my fight. I'm not going to the march. I refuse to go. And that is kind of like what I wanted to articulate at the time, was that, and I didn't know how, was that we Black people have been screaming, don't be racist, don't be racist, don't be racist, to no avail. Obviously, other people need to scream it too. So it is now time to pass the baton, in my opinion, to non-Black people, because it has to be seen as a group effort, not just Black people saying, hey, don't kill me, right? We need other people to say, hey, don't kill Black people, right? Right? We need white people to call white people out. And that has really been, she helped me to be able to articulate that, but I've been like, just refusing stuff like that. Like, nope, I'm not going to no women's march. Nope, I resigned off of this board. Nope, like, so how do we as Black women navigate between Or so the question is, are we at a point in our evolution as Black women where we can step back and say, I'm not a savior, I'm not doing it, it's on you? Or are we trying to balance a board here? Where do you think we are in our evolution?
I think we can step back. I think no matter where we are in that, I think that we can say now, like, yes, we don't have to be a savior. There's no need for anybody to be a savior if it's at, when that is pulling too much out of individuals, when that is like sucking the soul out of you. I don't care where we are in our evolution. No, we get to pull back from that.
Yeah, I 1000% agree with Jean. I think that answer to that question is going to be different for everyone. I do not think we're at a point in time where there is not still so much translation that needs to happen between the races, because for so long we weren't listening to each other, we weren't able to communicate to each other. So I do think that still needs to happen, but it needs to rest on the ones who can do it effectively, who have the capacity in them, and who don't have to experience unhealthy self-sacrifice in order to do that. If it's creating any pain for you, you're not the one to do that. And that's something, again, it's an internal decision. I've seen so many Black people try to communicate certain things, like, it's not my role or Black people's job to educate white people, or, it's not just about white people. White people have this idea of Black people being inferior. White people have recruited every other race with them. There are a lot of other races that believe Black people are inferior. So it's not our job to teach any of them, no, but I think it's still necessary. So the strong ones do need to continue to do the work, or I hate to use that word strong, but the ones who have the capacity do need to continue to do the work. And the ones that realize you're not being effective, you can't speak without speaking with malice, you can't communicate in a way where anyone has ever been able to receive it from you. If all you do is make white people mad when you speak, then you have to take that as indicators that you just don't have the capacity to do that kind of work. And it's just like a real thing that you have to evaluate.
Yeah. And I think that there's so many areas that we need transformation and evolution in. What I have done is, just this is my personal thing, is my niche is health, right? Physical, mental, spiritual health. There's a lot of work to be done in that for Black people. And so that's where I focus my attention, doing things like, talking to white people about the importance of diversity, not my thing. I'm okay. And I'm okay with that. And I totally support, the people who are out there doing it and admire them, who are on the front line. And as you say, have the capacity to do that. But alhamdulillah, I have learned where my capacity is and what exceeds that. So as we get ready to end, we're going to get ready to wind down. What are some of the things that you would like to leave as a note to Black women who are watching this, who may be struggling now, who feel like, I know that I have Black woman savior syndrome and it's heavy on my shoulders. I'm going to break, right? What are some of the things that we need to impart on them to help in that evolution? Malikah, why don't you go first?
Sure. So I think that the women that are stuck in these cycles are often they need to do a little more self-study. And this is not something you do one time, but this checking in process with yourself is something that must be a part of how you nurture your needs and how you nurture your vulnerabilities. So I think we need to designate time. We need to designate time as a part of our normal lifestyle, check-in hour on Sunday mornings where we evaluate, how am I feeling? Give it some words, what is it that I need to, what did not work this week? What hurt this week? How can I protect myself? And then the question that I think has just been really powerful for people is, in what ways did I not let myself fully heal? In what ways did I not let my injury fully heal? Because I think we are, and think about that, we would never make ourselves get up and work on a leg that was broken, that's not fully healed. You know, that re-injury process, I think we do that to ourselves emotionally. So asking that question, in what way have I not fully healed emotionally, is just really an insightful, powerful tool to be a part of your self-study.
I love that. I think those are great words to give. I think that I know I had to do this a lot at one point in my life, where I had to pay attention to when I was doing too many things and trying to understand, like, why do I keep doing that? Why do I keep overbooking myself to do all of these things? And then really got down to understanding that it was that I keep giving too much because I felt like I wasn't enough, which really settles with me, that I felt like I wasn't enough. And so I think that doing the work for us to realize really who we are, and who we are is like, we're here incarnated on this earth for this small time, but who we are is really our spirit and that God within us. And so I think that the times where you set aside space to really remember our truth and remember who we are, not the body that we carry around, but who we are truly, is important.
Both really important. And so the final thoughts that I would like to leave people with is, take time, small amounts on a daily basis, right? So a conversation that I actually recently had with a client was, we don't have to wait until I need to take a vacation and I need to take a whole week, or I'm going to go to this retreat, I'm going to go, right? We can't think like, oh, after I catch up on this project, then I'm going to be able to do this. You have to actually refill your cup on a daily basis, right? So 5 minutes, 10 minutes of literally just sitting in quiet, 5 minutes or 10 minutes reflecting on, why did I just get so angry? Or, if this is still resonating with you from your day at your job, like identifying where those feelings are, where they came from, and then looking and say, like, what is it about me? Because life is really about how you respond to it, right? When people do things, you do have an option of how you're going to respond. Not that getting angry is not appropriate or getting mad is not appropriate, but holding on to it, that's what we have to learn how to let go, right? Because it becomes, as you said, Malikah, that injury on top of injury, right? So, and it becomes a hardening of both our heart and our spirit. So we have to learn how to heal ourselves, not just a one-time thing, or I'm going to start working on this when I find a therapist, which you should find, by the way. Just a PSA, therapy is good, find therapy. Right? But literally starting very small on a daily basis. I find that people tend to try to bulk their healing. It's like you want Costco healing. It's not Costco healing. You got to do a little bit at a time. Uber Eats healing. So I want to thank you, ladies, for joining me. And if you are watching and you want to follow or contact, let everybody know where they can follow you or contact you. Jean.
So, okay, I'm clearly the oldest of the three of us, so I'm going to tell you, you can get me by going to my website. I am on social media, but I'm not really as consistent as I should be.
Okay.
So
Your website? What's your website?
drfuqua.com. So drfuqua.com.
Yes, and we'll edit the description of the video to put the contact information. And Malikah?
Yes, so you guys can follow me on Instagram at MK Pure Wellness from Malikah Karim, MK Pure Wellness, or you can find me on my website at purewellnesscoaching.com.
Awesome. Thank you, ladies. This was definitely an enlightening conversation, and I know it helped me. And this is actually a part of the healing process for me that I have found, having real discussion with other women with like experiences in the world, and it helps you feel not crazy. Like I'm not making it up in my head.
Yeah.
Yes. So I thank everybody who is watching and listening. I appreciate it. And until next time. All right. Thank you.
Great, everyone.